Let's talk to our friend Tanjil in Australia. Tanjil, what's on your mind tonight?
Hi.
Hey guys, how are you?
Great now. How are you?
Great. Yeah, I was wondering about what might be the cause for asexuality, and I was also particularly wondering whether the vagus nerve has anything to do with the whole channeling of brain to genital messaging.
You know, I am not aware of the vagus nerve having like a direct connection. The subdiaphragmatic vagus nerve, the dorsal vagal system, is more associated with like shutdown responses. And so I'm not aware of it having any direct connection to the genitals. But we are talking about sort of the neuronal superhighway from the brain to the hips. So I would be shocked if there wasn't something connected there. But I guess we'll talk about asexuality in just a second. Shannon, did you have anything about the vagus nerve that might be worth adding in here?
I don't know if now this isn't saying that there aren't, or that or not that there aren't even like consistently or predominantly that's not the case. But I'm not aware of it. I know that there's high concentrations of what are called nociceptors, in the tip of the penis and in the clitoris, and that is the highest sensory portion. And nociceptors are, this might be a surprise to people, but neurons don't just exist in your brain. They're all throughout your body. And nociceptors are a type of neuron that exists as a sensor, like your touch sensations. And most of this nociceptors that we have terminate in different parts of the spinal cord, and then travel up to the brain, where they go through the brain stem and then into the limbic system. So the limbic system is going to tell us whether or not we're going to be aroused by this, usually in the nucleus accumbens. So that is what I know for sure about genitalia. I don't have a good answer for you. I can tell you what I do know, but I can't tell you what I don't. So I'm sorry.
No, just as a layman, the part of the vagus nerve that operates in that part of your body is it's pre-mammalian. Right, like it's a very old system, and it's primarily associated with like shutdown and freeze responses. And so I don't think it's likely that it has a major connection to the genitals. But you could probably talk to a neuroscience who might tell you different.
Oh, sorry. The reason I asked is because I have a condition called dysautonomia. And a lot of people from my group, well, nearly all of them who suffer from dysautonomia, also have zero sex drives and are asexual.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I'm not aware of any good research in that direction. I'd love to just call out to the audience and see if anybody has anything great that they could send our way. I would be more than happy to spend an entire episode combing through whatever research anybody can get to us. But
the brain nerd in me has 40 questions. I'm so sorry. Right? Like, okay, so dysautonomia it impacts the vagus nerve. That's what you said, right?
Yeah, the autonomic nervous system.
So is it demyelination or?
So orthostatic intolerance, so standing up. Some people will get bradycardia, some will get tachycardia. It can affect your blood pressure. It can affect digestion. It can affect all sorts of things. So, yeah,
digestion.
I have a lot of medical conditions.
It can affect digestion. Okay, so I don't know if you realize this, but a lot of your neurotransmitters, you eat them. So our brain just doesn't automatically produce neuroreceptors, right? Like, so a lot of neuroreceptors are absorbed through the lining of the stomach and even more through the lining of the intestines. So like there's a chemical called tryptophan, for example. I talked about this while I was on Truth Wanted. That is in a lot of meats, specifically like birds. When we eat birds, that we absorb that into our system and it generates serotonin. So I'm wondering if it may have relation. Do you have any other sort of flat affect aside from sexual response? Is there flat affect related to any other aspect of your life?
Not that I could, not that comes to mind right now. No.
Do you get a high degree of physiological arousal related to like anything at all? Like, is there anything that gives you a sense of physiological excitement? Like, are you prone to getting things like goosebumps, for example, due to like an external stimuli response?
Yeah, I'm virtually non-ticklish.
Interesting.
Goosebumps. Yeah, you're right. There is a flat aspect to other things. I didn't even think about that.
So you may have flat affect to some sort of physiological response set. So there may be a disconnect there. So it might not even be the neurotransmitters. It could be overall physical transmission. So it could be the case, potentially, that the driver in your brain, and I don't know if this is directly related to the vagus nerve, or it could be related to the overall cause. Like, for example, I have MS.
Yeah.
But which means that I have lesions in my brain. So that's going to affect me differently than it's going to affect other people. And nobody really knows the root cause, but it's a demyelination event. So you could have something, and this is just me spitballing because I find this stuff interesting and I like to relate stuff back to the brain. If you have a lower physiological response set to things that are external stimuli, it could be that response system has a more flat affect and isn't as likely to produce the neurotransmitters that result in heightened arousal. That you're tying it back to the show, and to heighten arousal responses. And because you just generally don't have naturally heightened arousal responses, that translates to potentially being asexual, but also has other aspects that you wouldn't notice as much because they're not weighted as much from a social standpoint.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
How interesting. Thank you. It's super interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to look that up. Now, I'm going to transfer from porn to looking up vagus nerves and learn how to spell this disorder, because that's kind of cool.
Dysautonomia. Yeah. Dysautonomia. It's that's the blanket term, and it affects us all fairly differently, and it's a bugger of a thing, but that's what we had. So getting back to the original question, what do we think might cause asexuality? Like, is there a generalized theory on it, or do you know of any reasons why that may be?
Nothing concrete. Nothing that I think we could really point to as accurate. From what I understand, most of the framework that we've been operating under is that asexuality is in the same cluster as like our sexual orientation. Certainly, it's likely to be a multifactorial situation that is going to involve a little bit of genetics, a lot of like natal hormones, and a handful of other factors. But I don't think that we really have anything at all concrete to point to that would explain why we have this type of diversity.
Yeah. What about the fact that some asexuals enjoy masturbation but not sex with anybody else? Do you have any ideas about that, perhaps?
I worry that was context dependent too.
Like, I think there can be a lot of that. Like, certainly there are social components and trauma components that can be considered. In some ways, and I want to be sensitive here, it kind of depends on how we define asexuality. And what I mean by that is, are we willing to say that somebody who perhaps was born to be pansexual or maybe bisexual, but then was told over and over and over again that it's wrong to date somebody of the same gender, and so they are repulsed by same-sex attraction and end up with an opposite gender partner, would we say that that person is straight? Like, that's a really complex idea. And when we talk about asexuality, I think that that shows up as well, that there are people who are perhaps predisposed or were potentially on their way towards a more open sexuality, who had traumatic experiences that maybe clamped down on their potential range of expression. But that would define a number of asexual people, but certainly not all of them. And I don't at all
Yeah.
want to escape the fact that there are people that were probably just born to be asexual, the same way that there were people who were born to be straight or gay or pan or any of these different orientations. And orientation is something that we largely believe to be somewhat tied to prenatal or like natal hormones and genetics, but we have not isolated or identified anything meaningful. Shannon, do you disagree with any of that?
No, not really. I think that asexuality just exists on the spectrum of sexuality. So anything that isn't a binary, and sexuality certainly isn't a binary, has a spectrum. And there's going to be people, I think, who are just predisposed to not being as driven towards wanting or desiring to have sex. And I think people who are asexual are misunderstood, because you could enjoy masturbating, for example, but not necessarily be interested in sex with your partner consistently or at all. And that is fine. Like people's sexuality and how they choose to express it shouldn't be pigeonholed, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And
there's so many varieties and different ways that people express asexuality or even just low sex drive. It's incredible. Yeah. But look, I really want to thank you for that. That was a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed it.
I always enjoy talking to you, Tanjil. Anytime.
Yeah. Thanks so much for calling in and raising these questions.